Your cybersecurity solution is here. Introducing Pentester's Advanced Cybersecurity Suite. Have you ever heard about a data breach and thought, that could never happen to me? Guess what? The breaches you hear about are just the tip of the iceberg. The real danger? It's the ones that go unnoticed, leaving you vulnerable without even knowing it. How would it feel to go to bed tonight knowing your personal and professional data are safe from hackers? Pentester.com now offers an even more advanced suite of tools to identify and fix vulnerabilities. Ready for peace of mind? Try it for free. No credit card required. Pentester.com.
Two different betting offices, one in Brooklyn, one in Queens, that was run that Fat Andy and Mikey Gal, because Tony Lee had died at the time, so his brother became my father, Fat Andy's partner, to go down there as an acting captain for Joe Paterno and represent us with Tommy A to the Traficantes. So at that point, they give Fat Andy the authority to sit down with other captains from another family, and between the animosity between Nicky Carrazza and John Gotti, they split up that crew, and John Gotti's crew went with Charlie Wagons, and Nicky Carrazza's crew went with Fat Andy. So hi everybody, my name is Anthony Ruggiano, and I welcome everybody to Reform Gangsters. If you like the content, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. Also, it'd be great if you become a Patreon member. Also, we're going to start a recovery sit down. It's going to be a group. Hopefully everybody would come on. It's going to be on Patreon. And that's to raise money for the content, to keep the show going, and to, help myself and other people. So please, come into the group. It'd be great. We'll all help each other. I want to still thank everybody for Get Gotti. I have to talk about that. It's still being talked about. Michael Francis and Charles Palmieri just did a show today about it. It's still being talked about. It's still in the top 10 around the world. It's been a monster hit, way beyond my imagination. I can't believe what kind of a monster hit this show is. It was done really well. I'm getting so many DMs. My subscriptions are going up. My Instagram's blowing up. My Facebook. I mean, I can't even friend anybody else on Facebook. I have too many friends now. I have to figure out a way how to get more. I'm getting people coming every day asking to friend me, and I can't do it. So I want to apologize to anybody out there that thinks I don't want to put them on my Facebook. That's not it. I'm just having an issue. And, I'm getting some offers. I'm getting some interviews are coming in. I'm getting some shows. I'm going to be doing some History Channel shows. I mean, things are just booming. 99% positive. Of course, there's always that 1% negative because, they have nothing else to talk about. Otherwise, they wouldn't have anything to talk about. So God bless that 1%. But everything else is doing great. Funny, I want to talk about two issues tonight. I want to talk about legalized gambling, and I want to talk about Fat Andy. I'm going to try not to say my father because I'm getting a lot of comments about that. So I'm going to refer to my father as Fat Andy in this content tonight. So, but first I want to talk about, so today it was interesting. I had an interesting day today. So as everybody knows, I've been to prison a few times, and a lot of times it was around gambling, illegal gambling, numbers, bookmaking, sports betting. But the last time I got arrested in 1995, I got arrested with about 20 other people. It was a joint organized crime task force raid, Queens and Brooklyn County and Queens, both boroughs. It was a joint task force between both boroughs, and they rounded up all of us for sports betting. It was a big sports betting ring, two different betting offices, one in Brooklyn, one in Queens, that was run that Fat Andy and Mikey Gal, because Tony Lee had died at the time, so his brother became my father, Fat Andy's partner, and we were all rounded up. I was actually just a runner, but being that I was who I was, they threw me in on the case. My phone was tapped actually for a month, and there's a lot of recordings that I'm trying to get by a lot of people. Joey Molina is on those tapes. Nikki, I mean, there's so many wise guys, Ronnie One Arm, that are on those tapes. I'm trying to get them now. I'm working on getting those tapes from the government. The Queens DA and Brooklyn DA's office have possession of them. So it's funny because so now I copped out. I got a 2 to, so out of the 20, it was only 4 of us went to prison. Frankie Mumbles, we used to call him. He was the head bookmaker in Brooklyn. Ronnie Cigars, he was the head bookmaker in Queens. It was actually their offices, their 2 sports offices. They were the bosses. And Mikey Gal, who was only a made member, that was I was just proposed at the time. Mikey was a made member, my Fat Andy's partner, and myself. We're the only 4 that went to prison. Out of the 4 of us, I, of course, received the most time because I was Fat Andy's son and my relationship with John Gotti. So I received the most time on the case. While I was in prison doing that bid, I got indicted in Florida with Nikki Carrazza, which I put that indictment out today on my social media for extortion, murder, conspiracy, and a whole bunch of other things. And I wound up getting 10 more years. But getting back to the gambling, today I get an email. So a couple of years ago, I lived in Florida. The Seminole Indians, the Hard Rock, puts out a sports book, and I became a member, and I was making bets on it. And then they got taken to court, and they had to shut down their app. They had to shut down their sports book. So here we are. I believe it's about 2 years now, actually. 2 years later, this morning, I wake up to an email from Hard Rock Bet, from the sports book, from the Seminole Indian sports book. And it's a welcome back email stating that as of today, they got reinstated, and it's called now, the app is called Hard Rock Bet. Here it is. It's called Hard Rock Bet. And they welcomed me back, and they said that when I make my first $10 bet, they'll add $100 to that bet. So now here we are, how many years later? So I got arrested in 95. I went away in 96. Here we are 27 years later. And who are the bookmakers now? The government, right? I mean, how ironic is this? That I went to prison for the same thing. I went to prison for this. And now because the government gets their end, it's legal. And it's not only the Seminoles. Caesars has one. MGM has one. FanDuel has one. Now I even heard ESPN's coming out with a sports book. That's Disney. Mickey Mouse is going to have one. I mean, it's ironic, you know, that the government now took everything from the Mafia. They took it all. They took the lottery. They took the sports book. So now I'm going to get a free bet. So I'm going to give you my free bet. My free bet is going to be, so I'm going to go all sports. Look how nice it is. Look how nice and easy the government makes it to take your money. Because you know you can't win, right? Everybody out there knows you can't win. You know, you can win once in a blue moon, but at the end of the year, you're going to be in the red. Right, so look how nice and easy they make it. They hook it up to your checking account. It's so nice and easy just to take your money, right? But me, they put in jail. So I'm gonna make a $10 parlay, and they're gonna make it a $110 parlay. I'm gonna take the Baltimore Ravens against the Cleveland Browns. Baltimore's minus 5.5 points. I'm going to take them. And I'm going to take the Cincinnati Bengals over Houston. And Cincinnati is 6.5 point favorites. And I'm going to take that. And there you go. 2 selection. And that's going to be for $110. I'm going to win $377.03 if I win the bet. Nice and legal. Look, see? Nice and legal. It's ironic. It cracks me up that now it's all legal. It should have been legal years ago, I guess. I don't know. So that's my little rant about that. I'm not bitter about it. I mean, you know, it is what it is. You know, it was illegal when we did it, and now it's not. You know, the government got smart. You know, they're taking down all the money. I mean, they need it. They need it to give to all the illegal immigrants that are coming across the border in the South. They have to. Someone has to support them. Someone has to pay for their lodging in Manhattan, in the hotels and everything. Someone has to buy them their free weed. You know, their legitimate, their legal marijuana and everything. Someone's got to pay for it. So I guess the sports books could pay some of it, and the lotto money could pay for some of it. The second thing I want to talk about is Fat Andy. I don't mind. So I'm getting a lot of questions about Fat Andy's status in the Gambino family, about being a soldier, being a captain. Some of it is legit. Some of it is intelligent. Some of it is good questions. I know some of it from some people that won't reveal themselves are coming at it through not a nice way. You know what I mean? Like a zinging way, because which I'm going to explain to everybody out there. So I don't care. You could come after me all you want, call me names, and it doesn't matter. But it hurts me when people want to come after Fat Andy, because his reputation in the street is impeccable. He was a gangster. He was a man's man. Michael Francis says it all the time, that if you stuck ice picks in his father's eyes, he wouldn't have cooperated. And I feel the same way about my father. If he was facing the electric chair, he would have went into the electric chair. He would have sat right down in the chair. That's just who they were. John Gotti would have done the same thing. That was their choice. That's who they were. So in the 50s, Fat Andy got straightened out. He got made in 1953. Tommy Rava. And the reason why I'm bringing this up today is because I did OC Shorts today. I did a little segment with OC Shorts, which is a great YouTube podcast. Check it out. The guy does great work. He's really informative. He's honest. So OC Shorts is legitimate. And we had a discussion today about Tommy Rava's crew and who became a captain and who didn't become a captain. So we had a nice discussion today, and he's going to put that out probably, I don't know, maybe he told me at the end of this week. So anyway, my father, Fat Andy, got straightened out in 1953. Albert Anastasia was the boss. He was a special case. The books were closed. And because of the work he did for the family, which is committing homicides for that family, Albert made him a special case, and he became a main member of that family. At the time, it was the Mangano family. Tommy Rava was the captain at that time. A few years later, as we all know, Albert Anastasia was assassinated on the orders of Carlo Gambino and Vito Genovese. And Tommy Rava, my father's captain, disappeared. He went to Florida, and he was murdered, and he disappeared. Carlo Gambino became the boss at that time. He made Arnil Della Croce the captain. He became my father's captain, along with Charlie Wagons and that whole other crew, that regime, which was a dangerous regime. And they started doing the work for Carlo Gambino. My father killed the guy in a florist in 1963, another wise guy they thought was a foreman, and he did work for Carlo Gambino. While this was going on, him and Tony Lee were putting together a major crew out of East New York. Now, East New York was a neighborhood that a lot of gangsters come out of, Jewish gangsters, Italian gangsters, and later on in the 70s and 80s, black gangsters. Bronzeville was a treacherous neighborhood. Murder Incorporated was born and raised in that neighborhood. A lot of wise guys come out of that neighborhood. In the early 60s, Fat Andy and Tony started putting together a major crew. At one point, they had, probably for soldiers, the biggest crew in New York. They had 70, 80 guys around them. A lot of these guys made members. Nicky became a boss. Jojo became a consigliere. Lenny became a captain. Tony Pep got straightened out. We could go on and on and on about how many members of that crew, of Fat Andy's crew and Tony Lee, got made. It's major members. They were powerful, money-making. They ran everything, crap games, sports books. The horse rooms, they had everything. In the early 60s, the kids in East New York, Nicky Carrazza's crew and John Gotti's crew, they all wanted to be Fat Andy. I know people out there, some people are going to say that's not true, but it is true. They all wanted to be Fat Andy. He was the wise guy in the neighborhood. He had the name, he had the power, he had the charisma. That Charlie Wagons was there, who was very well respected. And between the animosity between Nicky Carrazza and John Gotti, they split up that crew. And John Gotti's crew went with Charlie Wagons, and Nicky Carrazza's crew went with Fat Andy and Tony Lee. And that was the divide. But They all emulated Fat Andy. Everybody, he was the guy they wanted to be like. Unfortunately, he was the guy they wanted to be like. And, I don't advocate for that anymore, that lifestyle anymore. So to move forward. So this was in the 60s. They're generating this monster crew. It's a monster crew. In the late 60s, early 70s, they start dubbing him a captain, newspaper articles calling him Anthony Fat Andy Ruggiano, a captain in the Gambino family. Nobody's dispelling it. He wasn't an official captain. Charlie Wagons became the captain because of, Neil became the underboss. Charlie Wagons became the captain. Then that was in the 70s, and he was still being dubbed as a captain. And as a matter of fact, people believed he was an official captain, even in other families. Everybody believed him because he had so much power. Him and Tony Lee had so much power, and they had such a big crew and such a powerful crew that only a captain would be able to accomplish that. But that wasn't true because they were still just soldiers, the two of them, Tony Lee and Fat Andy. The books got opened, and Nicky got straightened out, and Lenny got straightened out, and a lot of people got straightened out. My father at this time was going back and forth to Florida, and there was a captain in Florida named Joe Paterno. He was the official captain for the Gambino family in South Florida. His name was Joe Paterno. He was good friends with my father, Fat Andy, and everybody. My father started running around with him. So now an incident happens. Tommy A., who became my father's co-defendant, has a problem with the Trafficante family out of Tampa. They had bingo halls. And back then in the 70s and late 70s and early 80s, the bingo halls in Florida were big. They were big money earners. The mob had their hands in it, had the grip on them. They were big. They were $50,000 jackpots, $100,000 jackpots. It was legal down here for these bingo halls, and they had their hands in it. Now, Paul Castellano's the boss. Now, technically, they were supposed to send for Joe Paterno because he was the official captain down here to go to New York to take care of this issue with Tommy A. But no, they don't do that. Paul Castellano, Joe Piney, who was Tommy A's captain, and Joe Gallo, who was the consigliere, they send for Fat Andy. Not Joe Paterno. They sent for Fat Andy to come to New York, that they needed to see him. Fat Andy flies to New York, sits down with Paul Castellano, Joe Gallo, who's the consigliere, and Joe Piney, who's the captain, who's Tommy A's captain, and Tommy A., and they sit down, and Paul Castellano tells Fat Andy, listen, do you know the Trafficantes? And he says, yes, I do. He says to Fat Andy, okay, we need you to go down there as an acting captain for Joe Paterno and represent us with Tommy A. to the Trafficantes. So at that point, they give Fat Andy the authority to sit down with other captains from another family without an official captain being there. Why they didn't make Fat Andy an official captain at that point in time, I don't know. I asked him, and he said because sometimes you could do too much for people and they fear you, which I think that meant he killed a lot of people, unfortunately, and there was a little bit of fear involved in it because back in the day, they were chopping people up, and, he chopped up a few people with a couple of other guys. I mean, he did a lot of, even though he was my father and I loved him, he was a violent criminal. He did a lot of violent things, unfortunately. Does that bother me? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So now, to keep the story flowing, so now he flies down back to Florida with permission from Paul. Word goes back to the Trafficantes that Fat Andy's coming in with Tommy A. He's got permission to sit down with captains from the Trafficante family. He goes with Tommy A. They sit down with the Trafficante family. He straightens everything out for Tommy. Tommy winds up on partners with him, with the Trafficantes on this bingo hall, and everything's lovey-dovey and everything's moving forward. In the interim, Tommy A. doesn't tell Joe Paterno, tells Fat Andy, listen, I have a crew down here One of the crew members actually was Bobby DeSimone, who was Tommy DeSimone from Goodfellas' brother. And they're in Florida and they're doing pretty good. When I'm not down here, could you service them for me? And of course, Fat Andy said yes. And he started servicing them. So at that point, he's sort of like an acting captain for Joe Paterno, but he's still on record with guys in New York. At that time now, John Gotti's the captain in New York. Charlie Wagner's wind up getting cancer, and John stepped in. If you enjoy my show, please join my Patreon, ask your questions live, and please join my Patreon at reformgangsters.com. And it's still all over the newspapers. He's a captain. All the articles about him, he's a captain. We never dispelled it. There was no reason to, so then he got arrested in 84. He goes to prison. He's indicted as a captain. We don't dispel it. I mean, whatever. So to make a long story short, so technically, he wasn't an official captain until 1998. I'm in Elmira State Prison. He got out of prison. He did 13 years. He's in his early 70s. He can't do nothing. It's funny because he has a list of 200 people he can't associate with. There were some people on the list that was dead. He gets out and he can't associate with nobody. He owes the rest of his life on parole because he had a 40-year sentence. So he only did 13 years. So he had another 17 years on parole. He was already 71 or 72. So he was going to be on parole the rest of his. So basically, he couldn't really do anything. He was looking to open up a fruit and vegetable market for me because he said the mob was over. So he came up to see me in Elmira. I was in Elmira. This was actually the last time I ever saw him alive. It was in 1998. I was in Elmira State Prison. I had come back from Florida after I got sentenced, and I was in Elmira. And he came to visit me, and he told me that, it was all over for the mob. Nobody fears them no more, and everybody's cooperating. He was opening up a fruit and vegetable business with actually Joey Molina, who was a very, very dear friend of his at that time. They were opening up a fruit and vegetable market out of Philadelphia and New York with Joey Molina's crew, with this guy Billy that was around Joey Molina. With Joey Molina, they were all involved in their market in Florida. They were going to import the stuff to New York, whatever. And at the end of the conversation, he goes, "Oh," and he breaks my, and he goes, "Oh yeah, by the way, they finally made me an official captain." I said, "Now?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I guess out of respect, because there's nothing I could really do. I can't go nowhere. I don't have a crew. Everybody's on my list." He says, "I guess they just did it out of respect because I've been around so long, and we just had a laugh about it." So that's the story of Fat Andy. I never dispelled it. It's not made up. I don't lie, and I don't have to lie and say Fat Andy was a captain, because that doesn't do nothing for me. Doesn't enhance my product. Fat Andy was a gangster. He was a real made man. He was a real La Costa Nostra. He died that way. He lived that way. Nobody could dispel his reputation. He had one of the best crews, and you could ask anybody, the best and biggest crews in New York for many years. His proteges all became captains and bosses. They're still in the street. They're gangsters. Nicky Carrazza is a gangster, wholehearted man's man. Lenny DiMaria, another gangster. JoJo, money earner, big earner. Roddy One Arm. And I could just go on and on and on and just keep naming names of people that he mentored and he brought up into that life, and we all suffered the consequences. We all did a lot of time. We all have broken, failed marriages. Our kids are all screwed up. Roddy One Arm's doing life. I mean, I'm here, so, I mean, I'm not saying that this is a success story in any way, shape, or form, because it's not a success story. It's just how it is, how it was. So that's the story of Fat Andy. He was a powerful, powerful soldier for many, many years that people just assumed was an official captain because of the media and his crew was so huge and so powerful, and he was so well respected amongst the five families. Not only the five families, the whole country. I mean, he was respected in Chicago and New Orleans and Buffalo and Boston. I mean, when I got married in '77 in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, Pittston, the guy from the We Paint Houses, the Irishman, that was one of his Buffalino. We used to go to his Christmas party every year. I mean, he was the first person to show up at my wedding. I mean, these guys were powerful mafia guys that respected Fat Andy to no end. So of course everybody thought he was a captain, but he just got major respect because of who he was in that life. So, my hat's off to him. He was a great father. I know I disrespected him, and I feel terrible about that at times. But I did what I did. I did what I did because I felt it was the right thing to do at that time for my life and my family's life. Remainders of my family, to give some people some closure, give my sister and my niece, which who I feel terrible about, to give them some closure. So that's it. I hope everybody enjoyed the story. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of good comments, and I'm sure going to get a lot of bad comments. But that's all part of the game. But nobody could knock the legend or the reputation of Fat Andy. That's or his partner Tony Lee, because they were definitely La Costa Nostra to the death.
How do you think your life would have changed if you had gotten straightened out?
Well, it wasn't the only thing I never actually had was the ceremony. So the last conversation I had with Lenny DiMaria, actually like 2 weeks before I got arrested for the murder, was he sent for me and told me that I had permission at that point to go on sit-downs on my own. I didn't need any representation. That word went around that I was entitled to go on sit-downs as a wise guy. The only thing, they just didn't have the ceremony. So actually, I had that kind of authority to do that. If I would have actually had the ceremony and they would have actually burnt my hand, and actually pricked my finger, sometimes I think maybe I wouldn't have cooperated if that would have happened, if that would have actually really happened, But that's a tough question. That's something that I struggle with, the answer to that. Like, some days I think I wouldn't have cooperated and maybe I would have, but I think it would have been harder for me to cooperate if I actually would have had the ceremony, because even though I had permission to go on sit-downs as a made member, as a wise guy, in my brain, it wasn't really official until I actually had the same ceremony that my father had, if that makes sense.